My umbrella's in the car, woe is me.
Let's say I got 3 in the truck. I'm just gonna run for it.
I am unfortunately not the cooler bringer, so I'm sorry for the lack of ice tonight, but thank you for coming to my Terraform for Dummies talk. I'm sure we'll have fun with it. I do want to thank Tech Systems for supplying our food and being here, just awesome sponsors and making me happier tonight. Because, yes, do you all have anything you want to say? Actually, you all, as it's just you now.
We're hiring.
For what?
Well, the position I'm working on, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, it was like an SCCM engineer spot. I'm still working on that, unfortunately.
If it pays like 300,000, I know a guy.
No.
Yeah, that's the problem.
No.
No one wants to do SCCM.
Yeah, I think they rebranded it right now. It's called like MECM, MECM. I think that's the new thing for it.
I have no idea.
But yeah, that's just what I'm working on, but I know of course we have access to a ton of different stuff. If you are ever in the market, let me know.
Oh, awesome. Let me try and get my screen up here. Excuse me. Can everyone on the call see the presentation?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So welcome to Terraform for Dummies. I say this because when I started my current job, I knew nothing about Terraform. The only language I knew was PowerShell. And honestly, I felt like a complete idiot when I'm having to have the CEO of the company teach me how to do my job, which was just a little bit terrifying, but we'll kind of see how far that's progressed now. So a little bit about me. I think everyone's kind of used to it. There is a new accomplishment on here. If anyone's familiar with Sonar Source, I busted them. They do static code analysis. They're not very thrilled with me, to say the least. There is a full workup on my website if you're interested in the other ones, including the story from the sales guy tried to drop me for anything. But anyways, so like I was saying, when I started my job, I really had no idea about Terraform. I knew what a DSL was. Is anyone in the room familiar with DSLs? All right, awesome. So you were a lot smarter than me about 7 months ago, and honestly still are. I'm making it up as I go. Kind of for me though, so I have a love-hate relationship with Terraform. It makes my life a hell of a lot easier, and I feel like Andy is about to disagree with me so hard right now. But it feels like an infrastructure guy learned how to program and wrote it with no programmer knowledge. And that's how I kind of feel about it.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Like it's
what we might disagree on is whether that's a good thing or not.
yeah, no. I mean, it like really goes back and forth. One of the things, and we'll get into it, there's like, oh, it's a number instead of integer. I'm like, you idiots. We all know that it's supposed to be an integer. And also, I did get my own O'Reilly book published over this. I'm kidding. I really wish I had.
But you are a published author.
I am, just not in Terraform, and we don't need it. So Terraform's infrastructure's code as core allows us to source control, yada, yada, yada. No one gets a crap anymore. We've all heard it. I hope everyone has seen the movie. The next one is, this is what Terraform actually feels like to me. They advertise it as the window seat on the plane. It's really the toilet seat I just removed. So, core of Terraform. This first one, Anton, I can't pronounce his last name. I'm pretty sure he keeps the entire community alive. Anytime you search AWS Terraform module, it's his name there. He writes terraformbestpractices.com. And I also kind of wish someone would have told me about this, like to say, hey, every language has its own linting and syntax styling. I Googled this and I sent to my coworkers like, oh, that would have been really useful to know. But if you're ever looking for anything in Terraform, anything written by him, not me, or Cloud Posse. Cloud Posse is actually good in there. Do it. It's solid code. It rarely will break on you. And two of the things I want to highlight on here. So our blocks, what I'm affectionately going to call them. They always should be underscore. If you put dashes in them and then you finally get into like git pre-commits and start using TF-lint, you're going to be in for a freaking nightmare of it's like, I'm just going to exclude all these warnings because there's no way in hell I'm ever going to fix them. But kind of come down to with what I was talking about, feels like an infrastructure person wrote it. Here's all your data type mappings. I'm a little bit of an ass at work, and I refuse to call it a list. I call it an array. I refuse to call maps maps. I call them hash tables. And the fact that I have to have a separate hash table just for multiple data types is super duper annoying. And also a thing to note, I can quit losing my freaking mouse. Terraform is strongly typed. That should hopefully mean something to everyone. Coming from a kind of interpreted and a Microsoft-ish background, everything is very loosely typed. And if you wanted to force a type, you have to typecast it. That is not remotely how Terraform works. So our block types. So within Terraform, there's a couple foundational elements for it. We have our resource, our data, our module, and our local blocks. Resources, if I want to build like an EIP from Amazon, or if I want to build an EBS volume EC2 instance, that's how I'm going to specify it. Our data block is referenced a lot of times when we're actually pulling data from it. We can also utilize data block to read other state files, which we'll get into later. Actually, that exact demo. And like
Your cloud environment.
do what?
Your cloud environment.
Yeah. So if you had, I don't know, maybe your company says, hey, we spin up all our VPCs with cloud formation, we refuse to move on. Which, by the way, is a terrible idea. Please don't do that. But you can reference like your VPC ID through a data block, and you can query it by name and other tag filters most of the time, depending on the resource. For me, though, I honestly use a lot of data blocks for reading in DNS, specifically the hosted zone. For anyone that's been here long enough, you've seen my talks on DNS domains, and I'm a little bit too passionate about that. And I am absolutely terrified of nuking my DNS zone because that is a pain in the ass to update. I almost nuked an S3 bucket. Well, I did tell it to nuke, but thank God Terraform said it to not force delete because I was like 1.5 terabytes of content. And modules in Terraform is really just someone else's code running as a module, has its series of inputs and a series of outputs. And locals, we're going to talk about in a bit because they don't make sense in this context right now. And also, please do interrupt if you have questions, and I forgot to advance the slide. So what a basic resource block looks like, what a data block looks like. That one's actually really cool because you can, like, if you were spinning up workspaces or something, you could have it just always get the latest AMI of it for whatever you had based on how you tag it, and modules as a whole too. So meta arguments. I hate the name of meta arguments so much. They are arguments or parameters that exist on effectively everything. Some of them don't always for it. We'll start with depends on. Terraform is actually pretty dang smart about figuring out its dependency chain. But sometimes I'm a really bad programmer and I want to do targeted applies instead of my whole code. And I don't want to do 3 targeted applies or figure out the syntax for it. So I just use depends to make it chain it. Or sometimes legitimately Terraform is just kind of stupid and you can't figure it out. Most of the time, you kind of get away with that. Count. We all know what an if statement is, right? Yeah, that's what count is. It's terrible. Like, if we go back on this, and if we only want to build this AWS instance resource, if the environment is dev, we have to use count and run a conditional statement to check our environment name and say only do it one time, rather than say if development do this, if not, so on and so forth. But you can also use count to say like, oh, I need to quickly spin up 50 instances.
So one gotcha that we saw around count was spinning up 3 servers, which is fine if it is if it's expected to be a fleet. But then, a couple of months later, somebody says, well, I need this server deleted. Can't do that because you said it's like one thing, right? This group 3, I can't go in and delete it. So what was done was run the plan file,
Okay.
see which one was going to delete,
Or remove from the state file.
go into the state file, reorder it in the state file. So the one you wanted deleted was the one that got deleted. So
Yeah.
be a little careful.
Yeah, and this kind of
I
goes
still have
back.
to wonder how you got to, I want that one specifically deleted.
It should have been 3 individual servers,
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Because it's not a fleet.
okay, it was
It's
just.
not in an ASP or
Yeah, and you
anything.
Three servers, and instead of 3 separate blocks, they did 1 block 3 times.
For servers that were not actually exactly.
Yeah, not homogeneous.
Yeah, and
4 inches.
That's sorry.
No,
That's
it
my
was-
favorite Terraform horror stories.
thankfully, when I was talking about earlier, Terraform's dumb. I actually finally got a bug fix in it. I didn't actually write the code, but I said, "Hey guys, your client VPN just fails on right here." And they said, "Yeah, cool. That's definitely an issue. Thanks for pointing it out." They fixed it on the 4x branch provider, which we'll talk about what the hell a provider is later. So I was like, "Yay!" But for each. My boss has a big philosophy on don't use count, count is bad, use for each. And I tend to agree with him, except I would rather have a physical numerical 0 on my if statement rather than an empty array. You can parse array, you can iterate through the array as a count statement. But what a for each is actually supposed to be is like on our instance block. If we're making an EC2 instance, we can have a hash table. Okay, let's call maps for the rest of that. But we can have a map of a value or a map of key value stores in a multi-dimensional array there. And we can have like our name, our hard drive size, the tags that should be associated with it. And we can iterate through that with a for each. We could technically do that with a count statement as well and say how many indexes are in it and then start reading the data from there. That's terrible. So instead we can say, let's use a for each statement for it. And a provider, we'll talk more about them, but there is the meta argument for providers. And the reasoning for this is Terraform is very much like if you are in a compiled language and you're version pinning, as you should be most of the time. And you might have a module that says, I need the AWS 3.x branch. And you have a module that says, I only work with 4.x and above. So you can still have both of those provider statements and alias one of them out, like your 3x. And assuming the module was properly built with the provider file, we can there insert the 3x one in there without having our entire code having to downgrade or upgrade from there. Lifecycle, they're pretty obvious on this. You can tell it, hey, I don't want you to force delete it. I want you to ignore this change. For example, I've had to use ignore changes a lot, just kind of funny. But there's a super duper awesome CloudFormation bug with Terraform. And in the bug, Terraform marks the passwords as sensitive. So it produces a unique value each and every time from there. And you don't always want to like redo your CloudFormation stack, for example. So we can just say, ignore the password of this or ignore the specific module, and you can ignore specific attributes on it as well. Any questions so far? Awesome. Our next one is going to be variables. And I'm trying to just highlight a couple different how variables would normally look on the screen. We'll start with our most basic one. Hopefully everyone can see it. So we just want our AMI ID. Type, string, we can give it a description. You don't have to give it a description, give it a description, TF-lint, which we'll get into later, will yell at you. But our next one is going to say, hey, well, let's set a default. So there was a change released fairly recently, which I don't know enough about, that lets you not do breaking changes by adding new variables. So like this is very common for modules and stuff. So we like to use defaults when my company publishes our open source stuff if we're going to produce a breaking change, because we can just add the default effectively in null and just test, hey, is this null? If it is, therefore don't do this action. If it's not, require it. And all these get pumped down into our apply files. And what I was talking about earlier with objects. So this is actually kind of common on what you'll have to do if you want to have a map input with multiple data types. Because remember, Terraform is strongly tied. It's not going to take a string and numerical value at the same time. And so we have to do that. And also, there is a flag you can set on variables to sensitivity is true. Basically, when it produces your plan file, which we'll see later on, it won't actually show the variable elements within itself. Outputs, yes.
Does it still store it in the plan?
If you output the plan to disk, yes. And it will still be in the state file depending on how it's read in. So if you use like Mozilla Socks or something, it will never be in the state file.
Yeah.
But if you use randomness in the state file, then it will be. So yeah, outputs, pretty self-explanatory. We just want to reference what we're getting. So for example, here's an output. We want our AWS instance that we had, and I really should have covered that. So this is going to be the resource type, and then this is the resource name, and this is really just the output of it. To find all this data, it's on the Terraform registry, or the Terraform Docs for whatever provider you're using. You'll have your argument inputs, and you'll have your resource outputs. And sometimes your inputs are also your outputs, and that's fairly well listed on there. And if we're going to pull from a module, we just prefix it with module dot resource, or module dot resource dot output. You don't always need them, of course, and we still can mark them as sensitive, as we were talking about earlier. So that way your input's not necessarily marked as sensitive, but your output is. And our functions. So within kind of every programming language, DSL especially, I've just tried to highlight a couple of functions that are kind of mostly normal that we all use, and some that aren't. String, we're all pretty darn used to this. Numerics, it's mostly higher math from what I can tell. So your floor, your ceiling. I have an example later on where we'll actually use ceiling for the math function so we can dynamically produce a range. And on languages, so this is where I was talking about, it feels like someone just wrote a language, slice. I've kind of grown up with this called indexing an array. So what's really interesting, so if you say I want to slice this array slash list, and you want the first two indexes, you would choose index 0 and index 3. But you only want 2 because the first is inclusive and the last is exclusive on it, which really tripped me up for an hour or something until I actually read the freaking documentation as a whole. Encoding, something there's a distinct lack of a URL decode because I guess for some reason they never assumed that you would need to decode a URL. I can see Aaron is laughing on that one. And then
Encoded to what?
if you,
Percent encoding,
yeah,
For what?
like URL percents.
yeah, just generalized URL encoding. So if you're reading from a text file and you need to send it along,
Well, why would you need to decode that? Just for readability?
that's what I would do it for. And also, this is just where I kind of get into why don't you have it? You already built half of it. All you have to do is reverse the logic. It should be in whatever library you're using. Just expose it to us, okay?
So you don't have to use an exact resource to do it.
Exactly.
That's that much code you don't have to maintain.
Yeah. And of course, we have our normal file system functions. IP networking functions, these are actually really awesome. And HashiCorp did an absolutely phenomenal job. CIDR hosts, for example. So we can provide a full CIDR and say how many indexes into our array do we want? Do we want the 20th one? Cool. That will produce .19 as an IP, and we can use that in a for each or a count statement as well. If we were going to programmatically force us to spin up like 50 servers, and the business said they all have to be in sequential IP. If they do, don't work there, but you could. CIDR subnets. This is an absolutely badass function. So with VPCs, for example, and I have a demo of this later that we'll see. So on a VPC, we have to specify our public, our private, and our database subnets, or if you're going to use like Elasticache subnets, so on and so forth from there. And I don't know about everyone else, I really hate subnetting. My teacher taught me how to do it in college, and I subsequently forgot within the past couple of years. And every network engineer I've ever worked with says, we learned that for the CCNA and we never did it again. We use the website. Terraform can actually do it for you with the CIDR subnet, so we can specify our offsets and what our input CIDR is, and it will actually produce everything you need for it, which is awesome. And then our type conversions, so we can force something to a string or to a list. I ran into an issue with this fairly recently. So in Terraform, there's two lists. That's an array. There's also something called a set, which is the same thing, but it's different. And cross-converting it was super annoying. Have you run into that?
No, but they're not the same thing.
All right.
An array can have two
To
copies.
me,
of
they're the same
You
thing.
can't have duplicates in one, so you can't have duplicates
Yeah.
in a set.
Why do I want to?
Like that.
Why can't I just have a for statement? And then I'll put an if statement in it.
Or you can just use it as a set.
Because it turns out Terraform's language is secretly convertible to JSON.
It actually 100% is.
That's why it's so weird.
Like just 100%. So I promised we'd talk about locals. I'm actually a local here, so this is kind of nice. That was a bad joke, everyone. I'm so sorry.
Locals only, that's what Jonathan did.
He's not even on the call right now. But you're right. So locals are special. The way that I and my company uses them, I should also note, like, this is not a sponsored talk or anything. We happen to produce lots of open source stuff. So we use locals a lot for when information should be standardized across a repo. For example, if we're going to prefix or suffix something, and we could build logic into that and reference it from there, or we could always just pull it from the main variable. But if it's going to be dynamic, we'll just pull it from the local. When we were talking about the meta arguments earlier, especially for each cannot be combined with a local. So we cannot produce multiple different values of this. There are some kind of cheating and hacky ways around that. But if you're doing that, you should really, unfortunately, rethink how you're doing it. And I will use locals a lot of times if I need to have a variabilized input, but it doesn't truly need to be a variable. Like, it's something that should be a variable, so it's not hard coded in 50 places, but realistically, it's never going to change. Pop it at the top of the file. And one thing I should have mentioned with Terraform is, so it's very much like a real programming language in the sense it takes all of your files in a directory, compiles them together to create your actual plan in one time, so on and so forth. So we can have 100,000 different locals. It's just going to take the compiler more time to do them. Locals actually are not strongly typed, which is kind of interesting too, for Terraform being a strongly typed language. So I remember I was working with a coworker before, and he taught me how to do rapid iteration, just like create a subfolder in it, build your plan from that subfolder. And we built our map function with all the data we needed. And I went to go put that in and into a variable, and it said, no, can't do that. Your data types aren't the same. So that's where the object came in. But you don't need the object type with locals as a whole, because they are typecast. So let's talk about state file, and then we can get into this remote state. Terraform, or like Andy was saying, Aaron, it's all converted JSON at the end of the day. That Terraform literally has a tfstate.json file is the default name, and I might butcher the default name a little bit, but it has the state file which stores everything. If Terraform doesn't know about it, it's not going to do anything. So it is entirely possible for you to go in and say, I want 50 instances, and your company says, I don't want 10 of them. Instead of doing the hacky way you were talking about earlier, you can always go to the state file and trash them as well, assuming you understand the logic, so on and so forth from there. But normally that is stored on your computer wherever you execute the code from. You can check it in to Git. Terraform generally doesn't like multiple collaborators on the same project or repository. And if you do that, you need to have a remote state file and targeted applies, but it starts getting really messy and your changes get out of sync super duper fast. But so Terraform,
We implemented blocking. We were doing,
yeah. So Andy brought up a point. There is state blocking as well, but if you aren't on a remote state file, you can't block your file, of course. And
I think we had our state file in S3.
Yeah.
I used the DynamoDB table for blocking.
yeah, so just beat me to it by like 30 seconds.
Okay, sorry.
You're good, man. So you can check it in, just bad. And if you're anything like half my coworkers, you'll forget to push your changes to get. And that's not like my current employer. That is every employer I've ever worked with. Any infrastructure person cannot use source control to save their life until you teach them. But there is remote state, and as Andy was mentioning, AWS S3, probably the most common remote state stored in Azure storage tables. And I forget what is the actual S3 in Azure.
Azure Blob Storage.
Yes, thank you. See, I've purged all that badness out of my life. But so you can store it there. And so with remote state, when you actually have it, so if I want to build my Terraform state and apply it, it's going to save it locally. I have to go through and I have to re-init my Terraform environment. And when I do this, I already will have a pre-filled out file saying, hey, here's where I want to be in S3 or Azure Blob Storage, so on and so forth. And then what we'll do is we'll just re-init and it'll say, hey, would you like to migrate it there? And then it keeps a reference. And assuming you're in the same AWS account and have the permissions and your init file is the same, it will find it and you'll always be working off of it. There also is Terraform Cloud. I am not familiar with Terraform Cloud at all, but they do offer a remote state. You just pop it in and it will do it. I do want to highlight this. Keep in mind, not sponsored. I just use this and it's open source. So this is what we use. It's just a simple module block. We can input in our tags. We honestly never used any of these here. But we say, hey, where do you want to log it to? And then what's our main prefix? And then it will output our KMS keys or KMS key aliases, any IAM roles that it may or may not have had to create, as well as our S3 data. So that's how we programmatically build our remote state on the back end. And like what Andy was talking about with the remote block, this is as simple as the DynamoDB table is. It is very, very simple.
Used to use something called Terra Grunt.
One of our clients is having us use TerraGrid, and I'm not familiar with it at all. I don't really hear too many good things, unfortunately.
And I think the idea is that you leave the state block almost completely empty, and then you can specify different ones.
Unfortunately, a lot of this is kind of coming down to what am I exposed to, so on and so forth.
So Terraform Cloud, I haven't used that, but we use Enterprise Terraform, which I believe Terraform Cloud replaced or is in the process of replacing. Right? But it should basically just manage Terraform.
Pretty much.
One of the advantages, though, was it would also replace Jenkins. Like it ran jobs for you. Right? So you could go in and see, the plan file before it went. So I think if you integrated with Git, maybe you control the pull requests. It's been a while since I used it.
So
Mr. Cooper is missing a plug opportunity.
he actually dropped.
Oh, he dropped.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sadness. So I'll show some of the other state options, but this is if you actually want to use Terraform Cloud. Assuming you're authenticated in CLI, you can specify your organization in the actual workspace. And what Andy is talking about is you can pop on your Terraform as well. I've actually done it, and we built our own. I think it was just because at that point.
Well, honestly, the enterprise, all the HashiCorp enterprise stuff I saw is very expensive.
Yeah. And
We've used enterprise Terraform.
really doesn't surprise me. It always kind of makes me wonder how they are able to do all this open source. So it's like, oh, we'll just get the really big boys to come over here and pay us the money.
think that's it.
Yeah, actually is it.
I mean, I've seen 2 employers now look at Vault Enterprise and minimum purchase quantity has been enough to say, to just,
Yeah, it's $100,000, or maybe it was 50.
I don't know, it was in unit of tokens, just active authenticated things.
Yeah.
And the minimum was so high.
So our Terraform Enterprise seats, that's we had like 20 seats or something, right? Which was great, you know, we had 1,000 Terraform repos and 20 seats. And then the
Is
renewal
that
came,
like developers?
users, yeah.
Okay.
Simply users who can log in
The
and
renewal came, and it's like, well, really, each seat's 5 repos is what we expect. So really, you're only licensed for 100 repos.
Oh, when did they hire Larry Ellison?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, your renewal now is like.
Well, when
10x
is changing the
increase.
terms of the contract?
I don't think they really care.
Well, they didn't change the terms of the contract. It was time to renew. You don't get a new contract. So, you know, my guess is they were hoping we were kind of locked in and, you know,
It's kind of
big
a
Fortune
nasty
100
move.
company and would pay it and
Was that
didn't
your
know
previous employer or current?
previous.
As I say, your current employer would just go make their own, because
My current employer would use CloudFormation.
I'm so sorry.
No, I mean.
and
I
they make you
I
use
work-
CodeStar.
I
too.
work for AWS and I'm customer facing, sorry. Customers use all sorts of stuff. So I use whatever they use, which includes Terraform.
Don't worry, I have another buddy that works there and he's like, I love CloudFormation. I hate Terraform.
I prefer CloudFormation. Actually, I've got some slides. Is it?
It's better not just Yaml.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, you know, for me, the biggest difference between the two is like what we're talking about here, managing the state file.
Yeah.
Because until the Terraform Cloud was around, Terraform is a tool. CloudFormation is a service. It's a very fundamental difference. You go managing things.
You're getting into
It's
your
service.
protection too.
AWS takes care of all that stuff, right? Managing your state file, you can't because it's a service.
So that does bring up an interesting point too. So like CloudFormation, you can do manual edits, but really you're just gonna piss it off. And maybe, if you did manual edits, broke it.
When you say manual edits.
So if I want to change the use of data or something, or if I,
You can do all that. I mean, it'll delete the object, right? I imagine Terraform's the same. It's important to remember.
it actually isn't. though.
Terraform, right, is ultimately, you know, when it comes to things like user data, like user data isn't a Terraform or CloudFormation concept. It's an EC2 concept. So neither one of those services will change the behavior of user data, right? Maybe CloudFormation, delete it, redo it, Terraform won't do anything, right? There may be a little bit of behavior there, but neither one does anything different or unique about user data.
Well, maybe that was, for example, what I was kind of getting into. So like, we also use CDK and Stratus, and we have
It's
kind of,
CDK.
so we have there actually is Terraform CDK. I can't tell you anything about it.
I can't tell.
But
I know where it's there.
so we have a line internally, and we basically say if we need to automate it and then kind of do manual changes, we'll do it in Terraform. CDK is apparently Terraform for that. If we want it to just constantly be like, this is the definition, we'll go CDK.
I don't know what you mean, the manual changes.
Like a security group rule. So if I'm using a Terraform security group module and I want to go in the console and do something, depending on how the module's coded, it can allow it while in CloudFormation and say, hey, your security group has changed.
You're
Yeah.
talking running the Terraform and then making out of end changes. to
Correct.
like the AWS console or something.
Correct.
Yeah, all right.
Outside of Terraform.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a problem for both, right? But Terraform traditionally has been better because you can force it to update state file. I have to
Correct.
check on exactly what CloudFormation is with that.
And that's what I'm kind of
I
curious.
know it's on the road. I mean, I don't know. It's on the road. But everybody here in India. I have to look at that, but I mean, if it's not there, it's coming.
All right. And that's just kind of an interesting thing.
And the other thing, remember, like CDK, again, CDK just sits in front of CloudFormation.
Yeah. It's, you're just using interpreted or compiled languages to build CloudFormation. So, anyways, good talk though. So providers, like I was talking about, there's three primary types of providers. We have HashiCorp official, verified, and community. Pretty obvious what they all mean. There's technically a fourth type of archive, but that's whatever. As far as defining provider though, here's just a basic AWS one with a decent amount of config options. You can pop in like you can use IAM keys. Don't put them in Terraform. Terraform reads from your environment variables. I'm a big Assume fan, or I think that's what you're supposed to pronounce it as.
Assume?
Yeah, AWSUME. It handles AWS SSO and everything for me.
I have a bash script I wrote years ago. I've been using it since.
I mean, if you're using AWS SSO,
Yeah,
the CLI works fine.
this has some extra bits tacked on top where I can do like different profiles on the system, but it does. OMIZSH is AWS plugin, uses the AWS SSO like from CLI under the hood, unless you're one of my coworkers, which is still on version 1 until like a month ago, which does not support it. Tagging inside of AWS, very important concept. And this merge function, you'll see a lot of older Terraform code. So you can merge in your tags from like a default set. But now anything that uses the AWS provider in our code block here would automatically be tagged with whatever is in local.com and the tags here, which is very useful. And it kind of gets into how you do your repos, whether or not you have like a gigantic repo for everything. Don't do that, please. Or if you have a repo for, hey, this is production workload 1, this is production workload 2. And
So you say that, but Terraform told us to do that.
put it all in the same.
That's why we had 1,000 repos. Like, well, generally, everybody's got one repo for their account. Because everything's all in one.
You're saying just so they could Larry Ellison you.
Well, I don't know, but that was the reasoning of like why their licensing was that way. We don't expect you to do it the way you do.
Interesting, actually. Huh. Yeah, so
I will say nobody really had enough faith in it to do everything all in one.
that is fair. And also to kind of gets in, so where I used to do my DNS domain talks, I started doing DNS in Terraform. I don't like it. I was kind of told to do it from there. But one thing that became really interesting is as soon as you hook in a single Route 53 API, your Terraform like APIs slow down to an absolute crawl. Route 53 pisses off the AWS API for some reason. It's so throttled, it's insane. But I couldn't have imagined if when I did this with records that had like hundreds of, or zones that had hundreds of records, just how slow it would be if we pipelined it and had it go through it. I did want to talk a little bit more on providers though, like HashiCorp official, they produce the provider for AWS, Google, Azure, and also the random providers, you can produce randomness. And this kind of starts to explain a lot of Terraform's modularity. So like they don't generate random password inside of base Terraform. You have to call an external provider for it. Verified, an example is Okta has their own provider. And all of these providers are ready to go and just using the REST APIs in the back end. It's just translating it. And community.
There's a Pizza Hut provider, at least last night check.
I remember.
Okay, sorry.
You can order pizza with it?
Shut up, Brandon. I think I totally dropped this. This is actually a provider that I was referencing earlier. Let me find my God forsaken mouse. So is anyone familiar with SOPs? Mozilla SOPs. Let me just pull it up. So it actually lets you store your secrets in Git and encrypted values, and you can use KMS on the back end for it to actually pull down your data. And this SOPs provider is written by Sunbeam there. And it actually lets you pull it because Terraform doesn't understand how to pull from SOPs by default. And your only other way would be manually inputting the values each and every apply. Yeah, I totally buggered that, so that's nice. Let's see. So anyways, kind of getting towards the actual presentation and we'll get into the code in. What I wish I knew before, which someone told me Terraform was strongly typed. Oh my God, would that have saved me so many hours of beating my head against my desk? No if else statement. There is no statement in it. You have to use a ternary operator, which is var equals this question mark, what it should be true, colon, what it should be if it's false. And it's like, no, this is just stupid in my opinion. Terraform is truly API dependent. There are some things you can do without having internet access on Terraform. Other than that, like you just need it 100%. And kind of like,
I mean, the question is like, if you're not going out to the internet, right? I mean,
what do you really need Terraform for if
Yeah,
you don't have internet?
exactly. Right, Jim?
If you're on a plane and you don't want to pay for internet, I guess. But I do get your point.
It provisions things, right?
Right.
If you're just using your local box, there's probably a provider for that.
You have to say, it's like I'm on.
There's a
for like
private-
Apple
well,
Property
so-
or VMware or something.
So
Even
here's Lane's on the
KMS
line
being
here.
provided.
And I'm kind of curious, he hasn't chimed in and said, I have OpenStack on my laptop and my Terraform.
That's that.
We love you, Chris. But so what I was talking about on API dependent. So APIs can kind of get interesting. Does anyone know the concept of like parameter sets on an API or like in a language? So if you, for example, like on Okta's API, on a lot of API endpoints, you say here's the group name or here is the group ID. Terraform as a whole, it has no concept of parameter sets. So if you say here, I'm going to give you the group ID, if you also specify the group name and the API says, oh no, you can't do that crap. Terraform can't prevent you from doing that, which is something I personally got used to with PowerShell, where if I specified the group ID, then it would never let me input a group name. Terraform can be done. I think I've kind of highlighted this enough. So like sometimes the VPC module is great. It saves me so much time, but you might have to apply it 2 to 3 times. Otherwise you'll bring down your production, depending on the changes you're doing. It's happened a couple of times. Terraform will always want to do it the Terraform way. Sometimes it's not the API way, so you have to come in with your depend statements, or you'll have to do a targeted apply to kind of say, I know I need you to do this, and I'm going to have to add a lifecycle ignore on this, just so it won't do something. And where I was talking earlier on, some things aren't native, like the RAM provider. Generally, anything or any computer is going to have some sort of RAM that's built into it. You have to call an external provider. I both love and hate that concept because it allows you to do major upgrades on just the provider without having to like pull down the whole new thing. But other times they'll bite you. And then rapid iteration and locals. So where I was talking about earlier, and I'll show it in a minute, but you can just create a subfolder and it could be in your gigantic repo. But if you CD into that subfolder, build whatever you want, Terraform plan, it'll just build it. You can rapidly iterate, and locals really help with that. And Terraform standards and linting. I've talked a lot about TF-lint. It's just linting our code, making sure we're using the right comment types. VS Code, I swear to God, every other week changes back and forth on this block comment style for Terraform. I have no idea why. 1 week is right, 1 week is wrong, and it just literally changes week by week, and I have no idea.
2 highly opinionated developers opening for it.
I really think so, and that's the bad thing. But also, there's just standards. So many things just go and teach yourself on YouTube, but you never look up the standards for it. So it's going to be a live demo. So let me stop the presentation and try and fix it. For people on Zoom, once my screen changes, please let me know if you can see. Oh, Zoom just straight up says screw that crap. Can't do that. Using KVM providers. Huh? Oh, no, keep. Damn it.
Did you run out of time?
I was reading the Zoom chat. Income, you destroyed me. Well, anyways, sure. Can everyone remote see my screen now?
Yeah, we can.
All right. So let's go in here and let me make this so much bigger. I really don't want to see any of this crap, which is very unfortunate right now. I'm gonna make this go away.
Floating media controls.
Okay, thank you. I hate it with a burning passion. So this is really kind of ironic on what we're gonna do here. This is called basic. There ain't nothing basic about this repo. So I've already indented this here, but we can go ahead and trash that. So what we'll do is I just downloaded this repo here. And see, Andy, there's your tool alert for later. So anyways, so I'm just going to say, hey, I downloaded this repo. I need to init it. So we can just say Terraform init. If I have an actual init file, which we would have for multiple environments like dev, stage, prod, so on and so forth. I really shouldn't have done that. This internet's probably not going to be the best.
Has to download all your modules.
Yeah, I know.
I'm surprised it doesn't have like a cache in your home directory or something.
I really am too. So much of the internet, like, I don't understand. If GitHub comes down, what's a developer do? Do they just literally sit there and?
I mean, because everyone else is also sitting there because GitHub is down.
Same thing when AWS or Azure goes down. Well, I've got an hour to do nothing.
Yeah, S3, US East 1 goes down. All the others still have US East 1's down, and everybody's just like, nope.
So anyways, do that. This is how I build my actual Terraform data. So I'll create generally a .tf file, which is just all my Terraform content for each service. Except when I'm kind of doing like service template stuff, then if it has a CloudWatch associated with one thing, it'll all kind of go in the same file. Have our outputs, very, very simple. I failed here, and then it has descriptions on most of them because I'm an idiot. Provider, hey, we're just going to use the AWS provider. We're going to pull from our var region here, which is defined in our variables file. Please stop me if I'm going too fast here. So here's all of our variables that we have for this particular one. Some have defaults, some don't. I'm not going to get into like conditional validation tonight because I don't need it. And this is a fairly recent-ish change. So your versions values look spectacularly different. You didn't actually, you always had to specify your required version of Terraform, but when you pulled your providers, a lot of times the provider version and source would be in this block right here. Now that's not the case. So depending on how old the documentation we're looking at, you can kind of get something there. And then it tags, hey, I'm just going to apply these tags to everything that we're doing. So we have this file here called kdc.tfrs. So sometimes you'll notice, or depending on the code, if it's built for a single environment, you'll never see a folder like plot.tfrs. No, it does not have to be named this. Yes, that is the standard Terraform way of naming it. But I could create remote.tfrs, and it would be our remote files for all that we care. But anyways, the real meat and potatoes of what we're actually doing here. So we're going to break down a couple of things. So let's start with just getting our Elastic IP. I'm saying, hey, I want to use the AWS provider and get an Elastic IP, and I want to name it that gateway. It's pretty simple. Like, there's literally nothing complicated that we're doing there. Let's not get one tonight. So in our locals, where this is a very useful part for locals, and I'm going to try and explain everything here. I have a real bad habit of over-engineering stuff, as one of my talks literally was on. So we're going to pull from our var.cider, which is coming in from this kec.tfrs right here. Or actually, no, it's not. It's coming in from variables.tf. Our var.cider is 10/16. And we're going to use our slice function and our join function. And we're going to split, slice, and join. And basically, we're going to take 10.0.0.0/16 and just make it 10.0.0. I think that's right. Yes. And that's what we want, because then we can calculate everything out. So we're going to use another meta argument in here, because I should have listed this one, the second number function. For each availability zone that we're using in our regions here, let's go ahead and just dynamically build bar.region our AZ, because we can very easily figure that out.
When did Terraform get list comprehensions?
Where so?
That syntax seems really.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily this.
It's producing a list. It's basically a list comprehension, but remember it having that.
It is as close as to a programming core statement that you can get, from what I can tell.
Maybe that is the version.
1.0 plus 1.1 in specific.
Yeah, it's been a while, I guess, because I remember I was hyped about .4
Mhm.
and dynamic. And then I moved out of the position where I was using Terraform.
So anyways, so now that we have that, hey, how many AZs do we have? And what we're doing here is actually dynamically calculating subnets. I have been banned from doing this at work because apparently it's too complicated for anyone to read. But it's fun for this. Please don't ask me about BitSpace. I have no idea what the hell it's actually doing. I played with the math and it works. Our cider mask, I just want the /23 for everything. And I cited a lot of this from Cloud Posse as a whole. They make really good code. So we can build our private subnet ciders, and we're going to say for net number in range here. So this is part of the exclusive and the inclusive, or the inclusive and exclusive stuff here. So we're going to say, so this range statement is going to generate us literally numbers 0 through 2. So that way we can for each 3 times. And then we're going to run our cider subnet function here on our root cider that we have, the subnet bits and the net number. And our net number was not whatever the hell program ShareX there. Our net number came from this range. So that's generating our subnets. Any questions on that bit? I know that's one of the worst bits to read. But it's just looping.
There's a chat message.
Oh, thank you.
It's just yes.
Income, what is your question? Feel free to interrupt me. I cannot hear you.
No question here.
All right. Sorry, I just saw a yes there. Okay. So now we have that. Now we have our VPC. Honestly, out of everything in Terraform that it saves me, this is my #1 thing, building VPCs. I hate freaking doing it. It sucks. I have a degree in networking and I hate it. But what we're doing is we're going to say, hey, what's our name? What's our version? Terraform follows Senver, S-E-N-V-E-R, if you're familiar with that. It's just like how you should find majors, minors, so on and so forth. So we're going to find a name, our cider for it, what are AZs that we're specifying we use, and our private subnets, and the private public and database, which all came from this logic right here. And we'll see an output of this in a second. And the rest of this is literally specifying, hey, how do I want VPC? And also enabling VPC flow logs. Unless you're very, very money conscious, always enable VPC flow logs. If you get hacked, it's nice to have them, because you say, here are auditors, please have fun. I have never done this for the record. I'm just saying it's really good. So now,
Turning on flow logs.
no, never turned them over. I always turn on flow logs for the purpose of this being recorded. So now we're going to run a Terraform Apply, and we'll sit here while WSL is the slowest piece of crap on earth. It really is terrible. I did not imagine how bad it would be.
Do they not have a compiled version of Terraform for Windows?
All the tools I'm going to use in these other 2 repos, assuming we go over on time, require, where it just works better on Linux. So what I ran was a Terraform Apply, which runs a plan under the hood. There are 2 different things technically, but so here's exactly what we're building. So like here's our 3rd private subnet. And you'll see known after apply, like it literally will get the data from the AWS API. and it will store all of this to the state file. But the like real awesome meat and potatoes of this that I love is in our outputs here, which I apparently completely boogered. No? I don't know why it's not showing them all there. It's really terrible. Anyway, sorry. What it's supposed to do is show them all here. But it would actually. That's really interesting. I don't know why it's not showing all the outputs. It clearly made them.
Because it's a live demo.
Or maybe,
Yeah, I know. That's
maybe because if you resize the terminal, weird things happen when you resize the terminal.
maybe so. But here, we'll run it one more time. But what's super awesome here is Terraform is a lot of static code. I see a lot of Terraform code like, hey, replace this variable here, or just replace this line as a variable. We can actually do some really awesome stuff once you learn the Terraform way. And that's one thing that's really just kind of got me. Look, time to work. So this is everything we got. And you'll notice none of these subnets are actually overlapping as well, and they still fit in our master range. The original code from Cloud Policy uses log, or the math function log, and it will build the subnets as large as humanly possible. And we can also use data from like the AWS region availability zone provider and say, how many AZs will you actually give me? Because then we can say, well, let's read 4, let's calculate those 4 subnets, even though we're only going to use 2 AZs there. So you can dynamically build your code.
So what happens if you try to run it on Osaka?
Do what?
Osaka only has 1 AZ.
And the current code, it would break, but with one modification, it would work. And I didn't want to put that in here because I try not to depend on the internet, because bad things happen when you depend on the internet. And we are running over just a wee bit, but so one that I wanted to show, because Andy had to ruin it for me. There is a Domino's provider that you can use. I have fake credit card information in here for the record.
Osaka's got 3 now.
Oh, Osaka's got 3?
Of course.
I thought that was one that only had
So
1.
Wayne, next time, like next month, we can just order. Our
I gotta know these
pizza
things,
through
man.
Yeah.
Or not.
Because it was like an extension of one of the other regions.
Let's talk about that in a minute. Sorry.
So I actually use this as an example of what should not be a provider in Terraform.
Oh, no, 100%, because this saves a state file.
Yes, exactly,
With your
right?
pizza
Because
there.
now you can't track the delivery of your pizza, right? Because the state's changing out from underneath you.
So, kind of fun story. I interviewed at the company that built the Domino's pizza tracker. And the one question I asked them was, pineapple, please tell me, do people get it? And they said, it's a Canadian thing. It's not an American thing. But Andy is right. Like, why do you want your pizza order in a state file? Because once it's in the state file, Terraform will never do it again. Like,
I thought
do you just find your company expense card and build 100 pipelines or something?
I seem to remember reading the way this one's written is it will make a new order each time it applies
Maybe.
because the desired state is ordered and not delivered.
Oh, that would really suck if you had enough bugs there to like rerun the pipeline. Imagine like you have a Ring doorbell. Like, let's keep an Amazon ecosystem. You have a Ring doorbell, someone rings it. It's like, damn it, they just got pizza delivered 30 minutes later. But anyways, so
You
in
get
our,
a dash button you wire into your Terraform deploys.
please God, no. So anyways, this is what our variables look like. And in specific, I'm using object types here. Well, actually, these are all just strings and they're maps. But down here on credit card is an actual object type. This is the Strat test one before the record. Don't get mad. But yeah, and that was everything that we're doing. And the actual Domino's code is it's kind of interesting. It's using a lot of geolocation. So we can take my address and it will find the closest Domino's based upon their API's delivery range. But then it also has to take that data and then find the store number. And this is also a great example of why it shouldn't be this. I'm just finding barbecue chicken large, and I don't want to show on the website through the inspector because it's a complete pain in the ass to find. But it is not a barbecue chicken pizza. It has barbecue chicken and it is a large pizza, but it is not what I imagined it would be.
So you gotta have pizza.
Yeah, I will get a random pizza, and depending on if they change their search on their website, I will get a different pizza next time. But yeah, so that's just like a really fun thing. And honestly, like, let me show you my absolute #1 most favorite thing about this. One of our guys at work did a lunch and learn on Git pre-commit. Does anyone know what that is?
No.
Oh, Andy, you're gonna love this stuff.
It's actually,
Except you have to use Terraform and not cloud formation.
I think somebody's probably written hooks for cloud formation.
Maybe. So let me show you this here. So this is just, I actually pulled down a module we open sourced at work here. And in it, I have our pre-commit YAML file here. And there, remember how I said Anton earlier? Yeah, of course. That guy wrote it. So we can specify what hooks, and these hooks are very specific to Git pre-commit. So we're going to Terraform format, Terraform validate, Terraform docs. I ran it twice because it makes it more consistent and it doesn't take that much longer. Terra scan for static code analysis. TF-lint to lint all of our code. And you'll notice that one's just plugged to hell. It's never been fixed to my knowledge. TF-sec for more static code analysis. Then we can also add in real Git pre-commit hooks, like check if we're gonna have a merge conflict. We can do that locally. Check YAML, no commit to branch if it's main or master. Let's critify our JSON. Let's make sure we're not going to leak any secrets out to the internet. Which, by the way, if anyone's ever used Git leaks, if you're on 7.0 and upgrade, prepare to rewrite everything. It does not remotely behave the same. It is a completely new program. This one doesn't have another one. There's also another one that I really like called Prettier. It'll critify all the files in it, and you actually have to very explicitly tell it, please don't critify this file, because if you use it with SOPs, SOPs is like, oh, hey, someone touched my file that wasn't me. I lost all your secrets, sorry. It sucks so much. But anyways, so all this, you install and Git pre-commit through pip, so you need Python for it.
I'm familiar with Terraform, yeah. Didn't ring it up.
Gotcha. But yeah,
What is it doing? Is it running your Terraform statements in the Git pre-commit?
so what's really useful is you can instruct all your developers and engineers to add the pre-commit hits locally. But the thing is, we're all humans and we forget. So I'm an ass and I put it in a GitHub workflow as well. So it runs a status check. So when they don't do it and they fail to update the documentation, it yells at them. It won't let
What you
them merge.
need is a CCM job that finds their checkouts and enables it. Actually, if you install pre-commit globally, and then you do the system git config, it would apply to all repos, and it would just be there.
So here, let me do one thing here. So let me try and find something. So I'm going to purposely muck up some of this code, just like on stuff. Hey, look, VS Code's actually doing the right on top of comments today. So I'm purposely just pissing off the code. And if I just want to run this as a test.
You've got a lint statement that's looking for the descriptions.
Yep.
That's what I do. I just skip all the checks.
Have you ever noticed, or anyone ever wondered why Andy and I never worked at the same company? So yeah.
They said no fail checks. They didn't say no skip checks.
So this is actually not doing exactly what I want, but what it is doing is
Because probably because.
Have you get added it yet?
no, if I run the lint, maybe. Damn you.
Because I'm pretty sure pre-commit only cares about added files.
So now yep. Thank you, Aaron. I'm stupid. So Terraform Docs, by the way, one of my absolute favorite things. I just want to show this. So very specific command or very specific thing. There's only one bug in TF Docs, and it's super easy to work around. And you have to include your extra like code segments because it fits them horribly wrong. But keep in mind, this is all open source and not leaking out the secrets or anything like that. So, but we can actually use here strings within YAML to say, hey, I would write my markdown like this. And so we put markdown inside YAML, and Terraform Docs will literally print it out as markdown for us. And what's super duper awesome about that is we can show it will automatically read all the variables for us, put it in a nice user-friendly way. And this is super useful for whenever you're publishing modules and stuff, because we can provide an example and we don't have to comment the hell out of it. It's like literally it's auto-generated documentation. It takes the exact description. All of our code just documents by itself, so on and so forth from there. But inside of these commit hooks, we'll actually see quite a lot of stuff failed. So one of this Terraform format. So you'll notice where I changed like my tags file, I moved it all over here. It went ahead and fixed that for me. So that was one thing that it did. And it said it fixed our tags or variables. Tags again, I don't know why it ran that twice, but okay. Our TF validation failed because it doesn't actually meet the base Terraform requirements because my block file over here. So there's this concept of a lock file that says, hey, what provider, what are its constraints, what hashes. You can kind of manually edit this. Don't. It very explicitly says don't do it. I tried doing it before and it worked until they upgraded the max version and then it didn't work anymore. Whoops.
Don't do this. It explicitly tells you not to do it.
Yeah, but we all know that. So
It's
there's
good.
that. But so now we can run this again and we'll see everything passed except for Terraform 4 there. And TF Lint randomly failed because it gave live demos. But what we can run is now that we know that we have that one error. Yeah, screw this crap. We're not going to fix it. Okay, cool. So let me just go back and we'll finish this up. That was the completely wrong Chrome window. And that's the end of the presentation. I hope it was a good one. I hope I was able to explain stuff. And really, I just kind of relate to him so much right now.
I will catch Caleb's failure to plug. GitLab now supports storing Terraform state as it uses the HTTP provider, and you can use it if you're working with something where your provider doesn't conveniently give you one for free.
Right. Huh.
Like OpenStack.
So there, you can also say like if you're doing a Fortinet Terraform file, which I actually kind of think that's a good use for Terraform, but then you also have other people like, I want to Terraform my Okta, and I'm like, please God, no, don't.
Is the Juniper one any good?
Last time I touched Juniper was with Scott Morris.
Oh, okay.
So that was literally it. But yeah, that's it. Any questions from remote? Or they're just all on mute, that works too. Cool. Any questions from the room?
How about portability with Terraform?
How?
Like I'm finally jumping into Azure.
Yeah.
And we have a bunch of AWS stuff now.
So
Expect to rewrite it.
yeah,
Because the providers are different. And like even the basic concept of primitives you'll have in AWS are different versus Azure.
What's really interesting with it too is I remember like when IAC first came out, everyone's like, oh my God, it's awesome. You're right at once. And congrats, it runs in AWS and everything. There was also a very big political event with the company that started with a P that said, oh, we didn't build anything on Amazon specific. Yeah, well, that same exact logic can apply here. I didn't build it Amazon specific. I built it in Terraform, but as Aaron's saying, you're explicitly using AWS providers. It's not.
If you
Sorry,
so like if you're producing a module that is designed to be used on either and like takes should I run on AWS versus should I run as Azure as options, it is possible to create such a thing, but most of the things you're going to be picking up are going to be specific because the way the different clouds, like the way they think about a VM is different. Like, you know, you don't have a boot configuration in AWS, right? And you don't have network monitors in AWS, but you do in Azure.
Yeah, there's no abstraction.
Yeah.
I go through this a lot because a lot of people say, well, Terraform's cloud agnostic.
It's
Kind
not,
of.
Kind of.
it's not
Terraform itself-
agnostic in the
No,
way
it's-
the UU churches are.
Well,
The
yeah.
modules, the
providers aren't.
Yes, the providers aren't, but the language itself, yes.
Well, I mean, at
What
that
you
point,
described
Terraform doesn't know
using
about clouds at all,
AWS,
right?
Right,
So
it's just calling
it's
provider.
Terraform is not cloud agnostic. You still have
So-
to know everything about the cloud.
Right.
To use it.
So Andy, I think a really great example of that is literally ordering from Domino's. Pizza Hut and Domino's have drastically different APIs. There's not a pizza API.
But in
You could
theory,
build a pizza module and you could feed it different providers.
So you
And
can have a pizza
specify.
module which says count to 0 on everything when it's not supposed to order from that company.
When you have to integrate with a third-party service, like Terraform's got a lot of them already made for you. So if there's already one with Terraform, it's gonna be a lot easier.
You can even have it get secrets.
You've got a
out of it.
restaurant, it's a lot easier to do that cloud formation. Terraform is very prescriptive about how you write the provider. It's got to be a go, everything's go. CloudFormation doesn't care. Like here's the 6 required fields in a JSON string. Like pass this back and forth, right? You can write your provider in
I guess in theory, they don't have
Python,
to
C
be.
Sharp, whatever. Do what?
Oh, well,
It has to be in Go. I
well,
mean, last I checked.
It does.
officially.
Okay, no, that's an off-limit subject tonight.
You can, doesn't mean you should.
But what if I want to write one in Haskell?
Well, you can have your Haskell write your Go for you. I mean, that's literally what CDK is. You're taking one language to write a YAML file or
Yeah.
JSON. Does
But-
CDK actually produce YAML or does it produce JSON?
I've never looked. I don't know.
It's abstracted. No one gives a crap.
Yeah, Terraform providers actually run as separate programs that are started during the process. Terraform gives them a bunch of data, they do their thing, and they give data back to Terraform.
That really doesn't surprise me at all. It makes sense.
So you could write them in anything.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but last time I
Bye,
looked, it
John.
seemed
Bye,
like it
Chris.
was
They-
required to be good.
That's because they don't have a fancy library for it. You'd have to write the bindings yourself, and you'd have to be decoding and encoding all that stuff from Terraform and the way that it communicates with its modules.
So it's basically,
It basically has to be Go.
fundamentally, it's required.
Go is
to be
the
good.
only supported language at this
There
time,
you go. There you go.
but it is not the only possible language.
Yeah, it's like you can write or you can have Fortran run on Lambda just because you can doesn't mean shit.
I mean, I'm the one who shoved Kafka into a Lambda layer.
Kafka?
Yeah. So I could have an AWS Lambda produce into Kafka.
They literally have a managed service.
They didn't have a managed service yet.
Yeah, well, you should have waited 6 months. That's the AWS way, duh.
Still have an uninitialized, AT&T IoT button. The one that has a cell modem in it. You have to figure out what to do with that.
So just kind of back to this. Out of everything I think I've ever done in Terraform, Git pre-commits, like they're a pain in the ass to implement because when you enforce them, you have to rewrite and fix all the dumb crap you did over the past 3 years. It's like, oh, let me do this Terraform state move, or you do it manually through CLI, or you do it in move block. You took learn anything from that. There's no Git pre-commits exist. You only have to use the Terraform Git pre-commits.
And if your system administrator, has finally actually managed to win over some goodies with the desktop guys, it might come pre-installed.
It's good because if you got standards that are required.
You
This
can build your
will force
own.
you.
Never rely on people to keep the standards.
No,
Yeah.
especially at 4 a.m.
Yeah. Brandon has
Yeah.
a nice little phrase of past me is an asshole, future me is an idiot.
No, it's future me's an idiot because they didn't document it. Past me's an asshole because they still didn't document it.
Okay, we'll make sure it's thinking, yes.
Past you's always an asshole, future you's always an idiot. Plan accordingly.
But yeah. Anyways, that is it for the night.
Hey, Mike. Yeah. Yeah, let's turn the camera around. Just so.
I want to stop the recording now.